All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, the my Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. We will be learning Daf Yud. We left off on Daf Tes Amid Beis, second to last line, the Chalas Amaoretz Aldate de Rabbi Oishia. And as we just learned that we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Hoshaya concerning the last clause in the Mishnah that spoke about 4 cases, and we will go over all four of them in today's Daf. Number 1, Chalas Am Haaretz. Number 2, Meduma. Number 3, Lokuach Bekesev Ma'aser Sheni. And number 4, Shiyarei Aminachos. The Mishnah says on all of ththese 4 that they are Peturim Min HaMaiser. Question is, how are we to understand this exemption? Rabbi Yochanan holds, and here are Rabbi Yochanan's words, that Lo Gozru Al Devarim Halal. In other words, these 4, let's call them consecrated items. The reason why if someone has them from a Am Haaretz, that person is not obligated to remove the Demai rabbinic obligations, not because we assume that the Am Haaretz tithe them already, not because here the Am Haaretz has a higher level of Nemanus, but because Lechatchila, the Chachamim never made a decree on consecrated items. That's Shitas Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Hoshaya, in contrast, subscribes to the logic that Amos Kachim Olav, that there's a certain higher level of reverence that Am Haaretz has in his order of priorities because they are kachim, and yes, this also includes the kedusha of Ma'aser Sheni, and because of this ema, we assume that Am Haaretz, who's saying that he tithed it, indeed properly tithed them. That is the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Ishaya, and we will start today by learning 3 nafkaminas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Ishaya. Included in these nafkaminas, we're going to open up a new topic, and that is in these cases of the Mishnah, not in the ones that we began the Masechta in, but in these cases of the Mishnah, these 4 Chalas Hamaretz, Meduma, Lukoch, Makasam, Sheni, and Shiarim and Achais, what were to happen if the Chaver that buys it, even though he's not obligated to separate Trumas Ma'aser, even though he's not obligated to separate Ma'aser Sheni, if he does make such a separation, is it considered Trumas Ma'aser? Is it considered Ma'aser Sheni? Or do we say that since there was no obligation, and don't forget, Chaver Am Haaretz is saying that he tithed it already, then his separation is of no consequence at all? That will be a very interesting discussion. The Gemara is going to conclude that yes and no, meaning in some cases yes, Abed and the Shiyari Habenachais, that's what the Gemara is going to say, since the Shirayim that's given to the Kohen from the Karban Mincha is not the property of the Kohen, right? It's not Mamayin Bailim, it's not Mamayin Kohen. Yes, it is Mamayin Gavoya. It Bechlal does not belong to him. So if the Shirayim does not belong to him, which it doesn't, then of course, if he chooses to make a separation, it is of no consequence because it's not his to make a separation from. And the Gemara is going to say from there that why are you only making that statement by Shiyarei Hamanachos? Why don't we make the same statement by Ma'aser Sheni? Now, by Ma'aser Sheni, there's no debate. It's clear that there is a machlokes. We have this in the Babli Kedushin Daf Nun Beis. We also have it in the Yerushalmi. It's a Mishnah. The topic of the Mishnah is if someone uses Ma'aser Sheni money to be Mekadesh a woman, right? The act of Kedushin can happen through Kesef or Shavah Kesef. Obviously, the Kesef or Shavah Kesef must belong to the man for him to halachically affect Kedushin. So he has Ma'aser Sheni or Ma'aser Sheni money, and he's giving it to a woman Of course, she understands that she has to consume it in Yerushalmi. Question is it Kedushin or not? And there in Kedushin, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir says that it's not even Kedushin. Because Rabbi Meir subscribes to the rule that even Meiser Sheni is Mama in Gavoya. In the Mishnah and Kedushin, the other side, the other Manda Amar is Rebbe Yehuda, and he holds that no, that Meiser Sheni is Mama in Bailam. Yes, God puts restrictions by demanding, by giving us the responsibility to consume it in Yerushalayim, but it belongs to the owner, and therefore it does affect the Kedushin. Now, what we will come throughout today's daf, we're going to come to a certain Gavaldic conclusion, which is that by Meiser Sheni, it's a machlekes in the Mishnah. Do we apply the same machlekes by kachim, whether it's kachim, whether it's kachim kalim, each one l'shitosai, the bigger chiddush, whether we say that the parts that the Torah grants to the kohanim, like in our case, the shiyarei haminachos, is it taka mama in gavoya, or is it mama in gavoya only according to Rabbi Meir, or do we say by menachos talakula alma, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's mama in gavoya? In other words, is the machlekes by Meiser Sheni also applicable by kachim, whether kachim, whether kachim kalim, and the maskana we will come to today is that's subject to a machlekes amirim. That's more or less today's daf. So Chavle daf tes amid base, 2 lines before the bottom of the amid, and after we spoke machlekes like we just spoke out in the intro, Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Hoshaya, Rabbi Yechanan who holds that lechatchila legozru al devarim halalu, and Rabbi Hoshaya that holds that the 4 are exempt from the mai is because of emas kachim olav. The Gemara now, as we mentioned, will go and give us not 1, not 2, but 3 nafkaminas between these 2 approaches. And let's go. Says the Gemara, v'chalas ha'ma'aretz al da'at de Rabbi Hoshaya. Our Mishnah is only speaking about b'chalas ha'ma'aretz hi masnisa, which would mean that, look inside the last Maharafulda, right, 3 lines from the bottom, al date de Rabbi Hoshaya koloime davke chalas ha'ma'aretz mighty. In contrast, what were to happen if the ha'ma'aretz still owns the dough and he did not separate chal? And again, just reminding ourselves, we're speaking about a scenario where we know that the dough is not tummy. The ha'ma'aretz is also saying, I didn't get separate chal. And as a dough, he sells it to a chaver. According to Rabbi Hoshaya, the chaver is going to have to separate challah. And not only that, but from the remaining dough, he's going to have to separate. That you have to separate the maisres before you separate challah. You have to do that. And if he doesn't do it, then the kohen who receives the challah will have to separate from the challah trumas meiser and meiser shein. Because since when the ha'ma'aretz sold it to the chaver, it wasn't yet challah. There is no emas kachim olav. So the exemption of the Mishnah does not go into effect. We're finishing inside the Marafulda. Chayiv l'Rabbi Shai b'demai. Masha'inken l'Rabbi Yechanan af chalas chaver nami p'tura. So what will happen is the chaver is going to receive the dough. The chaver will separate the challah. The challah he's going to give to a kohen. The kohen doesn't have any obligations to separate from the challah the trumas meiser and the meiser sheni. And the remaining, of course, he bought dough from an ha'ma'aretz, speaking about the chaver, from that which remains after the separation of challah, the chaver is going to have to separate the mai, of course. But the challah can be given to the kohen prior to the separation. Turning to Daf Yud Amud Aleph, Avol chaver shelok achisa ma'ha'ma'aretz. And then v'hifrisha challah, as we just read in the Marafulda, al date de Rabbi Yechanan, that holds like gozru al dvarim halalu, he hada, it will all be the same. Bottom line is that when the kohen receives the challah, we're all speaking about a case where the dough also, the ha'ma'aretz is saying he separated all the trumas umaises. Eloma, the chaver is mechuyev to separate from the dough the mai, and from the dough he has to separate the mai, but he doesn't have to do it prior to removing the challah. He can first remove the challah, and the kohen who's receiving the challah has no obligations because like gozru al devarim halalu. And again, Rabbi Hoshaya, it makes perfect sense. that since the Amoritz owned it, he didn't own a distinct challah. There is no emas kachim. It's stama isa, so that he has no nemanus. So the recipient, the buyer, the purchaser, the chaver must make the separation prior to removing challah, and if he did not do it, then the kohen who receives the challah from the chaver must remove the mai gavaldik. That's nafkamina number one. And now nafkamina number two will be in the second case in the Mishnah, which is meduma, which means again that you have, let's say, one sa'ah of truma that falls into 50 sa'ah of what the Amoritz calls banofite chulin, but it's chulin from an Amoritz. And now it's meduma. And now the halacha is that all of these 51 have to be treated as if it's truma. And therefore the owner, here the Amoritz, will sell it to a kohen. The kohen will only have to pay for 50 because one in here already belongs to the kohen. It's truma. But the other 50 now is considered meduma. From meduma, no separations have to be done. So now another nafkamina. What happens? As we just explained, in other words, he bought it when it was already mixed. It was already mixed in the possession of the Amoritz, and therefore we say that the Amoritz will never tell. In this case, the buyer, the kohen who's buying the 51, don't forget the chulin is completely separated. Because Rabbi Shaya holds, Emas Kachim Olav, he knows that in here, one of them is Truma, and one of them is Taka Truma. It's causing the whole Demai. So therefore, he has the manus. We believe that he separated on the Chulin all the Trumas Umaisis. What will happen? Avo, Chabar Shalakach Pedis, Ma'ama Oretz V'nidma'u. What happens if a Chavar buys Pedis from an Amoritz, and after it was in the possession of the Chavar, then some truma falls into it. According to Rabbi Shaya, the whatever, like we just explained, that all of that mixture has to be sold to a kohen, and even though it's meduma, the buyer, the kohen, will be chayiv to separate from the remaining 50 the demai separations. There was never emas kachim on the Amoritz for him to have the namanis. Masha enken al data de Rabbi Yochanan doesn't make a difference. Bottom line is now it's demai. Now the kohen bought 51, even though the mixture happened while it was in the possession of the chaver. That means that the chaver had one soft truma, and the chaver had 50 sa'ah that he had bought from an Amoritz, which already had the chiyuv of the mai. Now that it became meduma, it's not removed. There was never amos. Again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, yes, loy gazru, Allah loy gazru. Beautiful. Now, these two nafkaminas, Rabbi Yochanan was the lenient one, and Rabbi Shaya was the chomer one. And the Gemara wants to know, what will be the difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shaya? What does that mean? We just gave two nafkaminas, explains the Pnei Moshe. That's a very important understanding of this is unique to the Yerushalmi. You're giving an nafkaminas in the middle of the sugi, you're asking what's the nafkamina. In other words, says there were 3 lines in the widest lines. Says that nafkamina, is there a scenario where Rabbi Yochanan will be chayiv? Is there? And to Rabbi Shaya, fakat will be more lenient. Is there such an nafkamina? And the Gemara says yes. And that nafkamina will even be in the second case of meduma. Where will that be? That will be, and this we can call this the third nafkamina. But what will be the scenario? So, let's give a case where you had an Amoritz, he owns 100 saw of chulin, what he calls chulin, that's already completely mesuken. And you have 1 saw of truma, you have the ratio of 100 to 1, and it gets mixed in the possession of the Amoritz. And the halacha will be is that even though one has to be given to a kohen, but the remaining 100 is considered chulin because it is batel. Now let's go. Al data de Rabbi Yochanan, again, who holds loy gazru al hadvarim halalu. We're looking for a scenario that we're going to be chayiv with Rabbi Yochanan. Then chayeves. After the one is given to the kohen, the remaining 100, which because of the dinei bittul is still considered to be chulin, it's not meduma. On this, yes, gazru, and And whoever, a chaver who's going to take possession of any of these 100 is going to have to separate, as you always have to, from produce from an Amaretz. Masha Enkein al data the Rabbi Shaya, that will be the big chiddush. Al data the Rabbi Shaya, what has to happen? You're going to be lakula, you're going to be ptura. So look inside 4 lines in the widest lines. That's where the Pnei Moshe explains the logic. Now we're looking for the logic behind Rabbi Shaya. Nami ikebe nayu, says the Pnei Moshe, and now the Ibchahavai. Now it's not going to be in the opposite direction. That Rabbi Yechanan will bring about a chumrah, and Rabbi Shaya will bring about a kula. And as we already mentioned, and while it's in the possession of Dama Aretz, and it falls into what he claims is chulun, that's already masukin. And we know now that you do have the ratio of 100 to 1 in the Pnei Moshe, Shadin Shazeh Hasa. Hale, one saw has to be removed, any saw has to be given to a kohen. And the Hashar Chulin Kamoisha Hayu. And like we mentioned, according to Rabbi Yechanan, umid Kamoisha Hayu means that it's not meduma, and therefore there is an obligation. If a chaver buys any of it or all of it, he has to separate the my separations, ma'aser and ma'aser and ma'aser shein. Now, according to Rabbi Shaya, he cannot even give that saw until he does first a tikkun on all of the 100. Don't forget, when you have 101, you don't have to separate Trumas Meiser from the 101, because one in this is Truma. But prior to separating and giving one to the kohen, according to Rabbi Hoshaya, you will have to separate, if you're the chaver who owns the 101, the mai. As if I would know that the one that I removed is the one, then according to everyone, you can do that step first. You can't do that. Because of Eibas Kachim, because he still has to give one to the kohen. That's what Rabbi Yeshai, the leniency. We are saying Misakanu was called Hameya Memaisvos, in order for him to be able to give to the kohen the social truma v'yadav mesuk. And since there is an Eimas Kachim, even if there's bittul, because of the law that you have to give one to a kohen, so now Vimkain in Wakach Hachaver le'elu meya samimenu, after he gave, and we believe that he gave the truma gedolim. Now he sells the 100, he gifts the 100 or any part of it, even though it's to a chaver, patru midamai, according to Rabbi Yeshaya. That's only according to Rabbi Yeshaya. Let's read it out in the Pnei Moshe, continuing inside. It's only because they didn't make a gzeir al dvaram halal. When did they not make a takana? Only on meduma. Only Amaduma. Indeed, since there is bittul, since because of the law of bittul, we don't consider the 100 to be medumed. Indeed, it's considered chulin. Indeed, the owner can sell it to even a Yisrael, or even a non-kohen can consume it. So it's like any other payers. And after you separate Truma Gedolah, that you have to separate the mind. Beautiful. So that's the third nafkami. Okay. Now that we went through this, so for those who just joined over here, so again, we are referring back to the Halachi Gimel, where the Mishnah gave various items that are completely exempt from the Mai. And in the last category of the Mishnah, we spoke about 4, which is Chalas HaMa'aretz, Meduma, Halakuach Mekesav Ma'aser Sheini, and Shiyari HaMenachos, that they are exempt from the Mai. And now the question is, Tana, we learned in Abraisa, the question is, what happens if the chaver who bought it, or who received it, chooses to go beyond the letter of the law and to still separate the demai separations? Is it effective or not? Now understand something, chaver. If I separate, let's say ma'aser sheni, from chulin produce that already had from it all of the halachic separations, my separations is nonsensical. It won't have any effect. So nevertheless, it says in a Braisa that the kulem shekara shein l'trumas ma'aser, or for both, if the person chose to do it, it's affected. Masha asu asu. Wow. Okay. And says the Gemara, Amahot Shreina Zabraisa, this Braisa will only work the Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, and therefore this Braisa will become a kasher on the Shita of Rabbi Yishaya. Why is that? So al that the Rabbi Yechanan, it makes sense. Rabbi Yechanan is saying, no, Rabbi Yechanan is not saying that because of Emas Kachim, we presume that the Amoritz tithed. We're not saying that. The same chashash that Yechanan Kohen Gadol and his Sanhedrin have, that there is a substantial minority that don't separate it properly, that chashash is still here. Elama, just because you have a chashash, the Chachamim were not machayiv you to do it. But the suspicion is still there. The possibility is still there. That's the logic we are giving to the din of the Baraisa, and therefore, if the Chaver chose to do it, since there is a possibility that it was never removed, so his current separation is going to be effective. But this will now pose a question on Rabbi Yishaya. But al date Rabbi Yishaya, that explains that by the four of the Mishnah, because of Emas Kachim Olav, we are saying that we believe that Ha'aret separated the Trumas Umaisis, which means once we have that Nemanus, Misukanim, they are considered fixed. And therefore, now this, the last three words is Akasha. Ba'at Omar Hachin. And yet the Braisa says that Masha Asu Yosei, why would it be that way? It should not have taken any effect. So it's Akasha and Abu Ishaya. Turning to the Yudom is based. Answers the Gemara. This is Gavaldik. That mipnei echad she'ena mesakin. Even according to Rabbi Ishaya, it's not that we're saying that every single Amma Aretz is going to be mesakin. We went from a minority that's substantial, which is the normal case by Peter Sama Aretz. When it comes to Kachim, more of Amaratzim are going to separate all the Trumas Omaisis. But not all of them were. There might be one, or there is a smaller minority, she'ein emas kachim alav, look inside the Tamara Fulda, b'pnei echad she'ein mesakin, that hadis amchinan al taimam, according to Rabbi Yishaya, the emas kachim alav, b'shum da amrinan roiv am ha'aretz einem chashudim u'mesakin. Roiv means, like Ruba de Ruba, a much greater majority, which is why even Yechanan and Kohen Gadol that was chayish l'meyuta, there are different meyutas, not to the small meyuta. But Elam play that there might be echad she'ena mesakin, and therefore that explains the Braisa. There's always the possibility that someone did not do it, and now you have to be machman on the other side. Since there is that possibility, we don't have to be chayish to it. But since there is such a possibility, if a chaver went and he was quite ashamed, you can't say that what he did is nothing, because maybe this came from the owner who was from that smaller minority that they don't have amos kachim. And therefore, we say on the other hand, we have to be machmin and masha asu gevaldik. And furthermore, the Gemara found another braisa, and actually the wording of the second braisa will substantiate fakert Rabbi Yishaya. Tani, we learned in a braisa. The kulam shekara shem l'trumas meiser or l'meiser sheni shalahem. The kulam is not referring to all of the cases we had in Hakal and Shabbat Damai. Just to make that clear for the record, we are referring only to this last category of the Mishnah, right? That it's edible food and the person bought it to eat it. Elama, either by the kachim, like gazru or emas, that you don't have to do it. And in those cases, if you did, the chaver did do it, either trumas meiser or meiser sheni, or both, masha asu yasuis, atkan is exactly the same words of the first braisa. Here the braisa adds words, and these additional words, adarabah, are only needed lirab hoishaya. They pnei echad she'ena mesakin. Clearly, you can even argue that the reason why the Braisa adds these extra words is because the Machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Yishaya is really a Machlokes Tanoi. The first Braisa doesn't add these words because it's not about the fact whether they were Masakin or not. It's not about that. It's about Legazru. Legazru doesn't mean that we're not Chayish. Legazru means you're not obligated. These extra words are needed even Rabbi Yishaya. No, this Tana will hold that there is a concept of Amos Kachim, which is a logic why we would presume that he actually did it, but he doesn't mean all. It means just a greater number. Okay. Now the Mishnah went on. Let's move on to the second to last case. And we already explained when we spoke to Mishnah, that's even if you bought it, the Kesav Ma'aser Sheni Shal Vadai. But we said it because the Gemara has a question and an answer. So the Gemara wants to know that the Rebbe Bun Bar Chia asked before Rab Ze'era, Ad Kedoin Bekesav Ma'aser Sheni Shal Damai, is the Mishnah only referring to produce that was bought in Yerushalmi with Kesav Ma'aser Sheni Al Damai, that produce doesn't have to be Damai or not, or even by Vadai? That was his question. I know we said Vadai because we had the Gemara ahead, and Abzeda says, I feel about Vadai. Okay, and now the final case of the Mishnah. Shiyarei Menachis. So when a non-Kohen brings a carbon mincha, as a rule, a kemitza is taka burnt up on the Mizbeach, Haktorah of the kemitza. Similar to the Zrikas Hadam by an animal carbon. But the rest is eaten by the Kahanim. And now we're saying that even if the raw material was bought by an Amoritz, it was made by the Amoritz. So therefore we are relying on his statement that he separated the Trumas from Isras. The Kahanim rely on it and they don't need to separate Trumas from Isras. So now, says the Gemara, we learned in a Braisa, and Vikulan L'chu'ura. First of all, the Kulam doesn't go on all of the cases that we have in the Spedic. The Kulam does go into this final category. But as we'll see in a moment, that the Kulam doesn't actually mean all four of them. But in this category, that Shekara, Shem, L'trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Shalahem, as we just quoted above, right? The first Braisa and the second Braisa, Masha Asui Asui. Okay, so now the Gemara has a comment on that. Hold on a second. We already made that work both for Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Yishaya. The challenge we have with this statement is that Shenayim, the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar is beginning with a presumption. That will be the whole shtickle Gemara. That unlike, I'm just saying the whole thing by heart now, unlike by Ma'aser Sheni, that we have a Mishnah in Kedushin. In Bavli, it's on Daf Nun Beis, in which there is a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir holds that if a person is mekadosh a woman because of Ma'aser Sheni or with Ma'aser Sheni product, she's not mikudeshes because he views Ma'aser Sheni to be mamoin gavoya. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Ma'aser Sheni is mamoin ba'olim. So therefore, the Kedushin is effective because he owns it. You know, when the rabbi is officiating a wedding, halachically he must ask the chassan. He does it under the chuppah b'fnei kolam ve'eda. Does this ring belong to you? He has to make that question. And it's really important for the Adam to know that he's asking that question, because if not, how do they know if they affected a Kedushin? How do you know that? Okay. And Stam Lahoyed, I was just thinking right now that, as time goes on, there are more and more chumras that people are using when they're officiating a marriage. One chumrah that I heard that makes a lot of sense is the following. The minig of veiling a kala is really originated in the Chumash. But tika chatzoy, but tiskasos, right? By Rivka, she veiled herself when she met Yitzchak, and there was a kedushin going on over there, which is another whole topic. Was Eliezer a shliach, and he already gave her the kedushin when he gave her the gifts. That's another whole discussion. But be that as it may, we have the source of a kala veiling her face, but nowhere in halacha does the veil have to be what we call a bulletproof veil, a non-see-through veil. It doesn't have to be that way. And there is a big advantage for the veil to be a see-through veil. And this is a halacha. When I heard it, they said, yeah. And that is that how can you affect Kedushin? How can the chassan affect Kedushin when he doesn't know it's her? He doesn't know who is being Mekadosh. And even though Eloma, he saw her by the Badekinish. So since the Eidim are not only Eidibir or the Eidikiyom by Kedushin, there is a logic to say that the Eidim that are designated to be the Eidik Kedushin, they have to go to the Badekinish to see, again, this is if the veil is completely non-transparent, to see that this is her. In other words, the Eidim have to know, like I mentioned, that the ring belongs to him. The Eidim have to know that she is she. If not Rachaleah, if not, how do they know? What are they being made on? That he gave to a veiled woman who you can't see who she is, he gave her Kedushin? That should not affect Kedushin.
Well, at least after they take off the veil, and then you can see retroactively that it's right.
So Rabbi Mendel is saying a good word, that listen, these are new chumras. So what about by my condition, by your condition. I don't think they emphasize for the Edom to be there. Could be that they have to be there long enough that when the Kedushin is over, they themselves get clarity as to who she is. Okay, that's a good logic. But that's not only on the husband, that's also on the Edom. And even better, this idea that the Edom should be there by the Badakish. But coming back over here. So because you have to own it for you to affect Kedushin. So now here's the word. Shiyari Hamenachas, Rabbi Lazar's presumption is, as we'll make it clear, that the Machloikes, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, is only by Meiser Shem. Masha Enkein by Kachim, and this is whether it's Kache Kachim, Menachos, my friends, are Kache Kachim, or even Kache Kalim, like you have the Chazay and the Shoik from a Shlamim that you give to the Kohen, and there the Kohen, it doesn't only have to be male Kohanim by Kachim Kalim, like we read, theoretically we say the day before davening by Kachim Kalim, just like the owners can eat the remaining carbon. Of course, in Yerushalmi and HaKodesh, but anyone can eat it. Same thing with the Kohanim. Heim, Unashem, Uvmeim, Uvavavdeim. And the Rabbi Lazar holds that L'kula Alma, it belongs to God. It's Elamad, it's called Shulchan Gavoya. Hashem allows the Kohen to eat off his table to the exclusion of anyone who's not a Kohen. And therefore, Rabbi Lazar says that this Braisa, that if you made this Shkar Hashem, it's effective, is Chutz Mishiyar Menachas. Because Shiyar Menachas does not belong to the Kohen. How can he affect it? It's not his to affect. The Gemara now is going to have a problem. So Rabbi Yirmiyah Omar, hold on. What about the other cases? Now, the other cases, I know there are three other cases. Chalas HaMa'aretz and Meduma and Halakoch B'Kesev Ma'aser Sheni. But as we'll see clearly, Rabbi Yirmiyah is not focusing on the first two. We are only focusing on Halakoch B'Kesev Ma'aser Sheni. So when you, Rabbi Lazar, and Amoida, right, this Rabbi Lazar and Pedas, when you are limiting the words of the Braisa who says V'kulan is not all, it's all other than Shiyarei HaMenachos, you are basically saying that the others, Hashi'ar, b'machloikes. Hashi'ar means Ma'aser Sheni, not that the other three for sure, Masha Asu is not Asu. You can't say that either. Why not? Because even Kesev, Ma'aser Sheni, L'Rabbi Yehuda belongs to the Ba'alim. But it's totally b'machloikes. No, it's whether the Kriya Shem on Ma'aser Sheni is effective or not, that is a machloikes. Let Rav Meir not, and let Rabbi Yehuda yes. The only one in which there is no machloikes, but l'kula alma, it will not be effective, is b'shiyarei hamenachos. So says Rabbi Yirmiyah, extrapolating from what Rabbi Lazar is saying. He's just clarifying. Problem is, and we have time enough to read the answer, the question and the answer. That's going to go into Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. That Rabbi Yossi boy, see, Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with that. Rabbi Yossi holds that just like Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda have a machloikas v'negei Ma'aser Sheni, even though they argue regarding Ma'aser Sheni, they really argue regarding Kachim as well. They argue regarding Kachim as well. So Rabbi Yossi boy, no, what machloikas was Rabbi Yirmiyah referring to? When he says Ba'isha'ar Tolu b'machloikas, he's referring to the machloikas Kedushin and the Bavli Daf Nun Beis, the machloikas Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Even though true, the Mishnah there in the machloikas is only referring to Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'anon Kaimin. Hold on, but Rabbi Yossi holds that machloikas also goes to Kachim. So the Memanushach, Rav Meir, who holds that what? The Ma'aser Sheni is Mammon Gevoya, according to the Amoida Rabbi Yossi. That same shita, Rav Meir only applies to Kachim. He Ma'aser, he Shiyarei Menachos. And true, Eloyasa, Klum, but Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that Ma'aser Sheni is Mammon Ba'alim, according to Rabbi Yossi. Not only does he hold that true to be by Ma'aser Sheni, that's the Chiddush, but according to Rabbi Yossi, Shitas Rabbi Yehuda is also by Kachim. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Masha Asay Asui should even apply to Shiyarei Menachos. Masha Asay Asui. Look inside just the last 3-4 lines in the Manafuld of this Amit before we're going to go into Daf Yud Aleph. The Iker Rabbi Yehuda, then Masha Asay Asui should even go to Shiyarei HaMenachos. Why? Because the Sfira late, this goes to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that Rabbi Yehuda, that's the Rabbi Yehuda in Kiddushin, Kol HaKochim Yalfinan Mi Bechar, that yes, you could be Mekadosh a woman, because he holds, that Rabbi Yehuda holds, that even money, even menachos, even kachim, is mamin koine. So therefore, the words that Rabbi Lazar says, which is he's right, the Brisa says Masha Asa Yas. Rabbi Lazar says not so quick. What Rabbi Yossi is really asking, that no, what Rabbi Lazar should have said is that this Brisa Masha Asa Yasui, let's go this way, should go according to Rabbi Yehuda. That would be the best thing. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, Takamasha Asa Yasui. My Sasheni belongs to the owner, Kachim belongs to the Kohen, and the Bryce is saying the Chiddush that if you want to be Machmer, you can be effective. It's yours to be Machmer upon. And if you're saying that Tali b'Machleikes, that means if you're opening up the possibility of a Rabbi Meir, so then why does he say only by Shiarim and Nachas? Then it should be by both. That's a Gavaldik Kasha. And to which the Gemara acknowledges that, yeah, Rabbi Yossi is asking that question because Rabbi Yossi holds that the machlokes between Amein and Rabbi Yehuda, which is explicitly by Ma'aser Sheni, is also applicable to Kachim. But that's only Rabbi Yossi Fakert. Rabbi Lazar's statement, Rabbi Yirmiyah's statement, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who's extrapolating from Rabbi Lazar, he disagrees with that. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds, my friends, that Rabbi Lazar holds, Rabbi Lazar and Pedas, that the machlokes in Kedushin is only regarding Ma'aser Sheni, and Lakula Alma by Kachim, it's Mamoin Gavoya, and therefore he made a beautiful statement that even though the Brisa says the Kula Masha Asa Yasoi, the Kulan doesn't go to Shiari Haminachis, doesn't go to Ma'aser Sheni. There it's Talib Machlokes. Let's just read that inside. So Amar Rav Mana answers the Gemara Daf Yud Aleph on the top that Azlin on Lekei Sodin, and indeed the Shmuas Rab Chizkiah Yosef Masnei. I heard him learn, and now he's quoting part of the Mishnah in Kiddushin. And it's amazing that the Mishnah in Kiddushin, we keep on quoting Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, the part of that Mishnah is about Ma'aser Sheni, that a man is giving a woman Kiddushin with Ma'aser Sheni, with Kesef Ma'aser Sheni. That Mishnah is not only speaking about Ma'aser Sheni, that Mishnah begins, HaMakadosh Bechelkoi. Clear. Mishnah also speaks about a man giving money to a woman with what he got as kachim. And again, no difference. Kachim kalim. Kachim kalim. The Mishnah says Eina Mikadeshes. Now, when you learn that Mishnah, it sounds, is this according to everyone or not? Now you're getting clarity on it. Or are we saying that the ratio of the Mishnah that Hamakadesh Bechelkoi Eina Mikadeshes, maybe that's only according to Rav Meir? That's the question. So Rabbi Lazar Amar that Divrei Hakol, Gavaldi. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, no. That even though the Mishnah and the Reishon doesn't mention Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, but that's really the machlokes, and only Rabbi Meir will be the one that will subscribe to the Eina Mikudeshes. And when I heard over there in Kesarim such a statement, right, that Rabbi Chizkiah is saying, when you learn that Mishnah, there's a machlokes Amoyroyim between Rabbi Lazar and between Rabbi Yechanan, whether the ratio of the Mishnah is Lekula Alma or it's B'machlokes. I told him, where did you get that from? Whoever told you that the ratio of the Mishnah is also subject to a machlokes? Mino Shema Rebbe Hadam Milsa, and he told me I heard it from Rabbi Yirmiyah, and I never knew when I heard it right then what Rabbi Yirmiyah. This is the Rabbi Yirmiyah of the mind. When Rabbi Yirmiyah extrapolated, like we learned over here before, that Rabbi Yirmiyah Omar Hasha'ad B'machlokes. Gavaldig. But Amr is Yos, and he says, good gesagt. And Amar now speaks it up. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who Shama Hadad Rabbi Lazar, who said Divrei Hakol he. That's why he said who the Amar b'machlokes. Rabbi Yossi, who asked the Kasha, the Loy Shama, he never heard that statement from Chizkiah. So therefore, Tzrichalei, that's why Tzrichalei means not he needed. Tzrichalei here in the Yerushalmi means he had a problem, he had a doubt. And he asked a question. That no, that it's not Divrei Hakoil, that the ratio of the Mishnah is also totally b'machlokes, and therefore the statement that Masha Asa Yasui, don't exclude Shiyarei HaMenaches and include everything else. If you want to bring in the machlokes, then you have to exclude both, not only one. That he asked, like we're quoting his question, that who do Amar, Haidu b'machlokes, Iker Rav Meir, he Ma'aser Sheni Shirei Menaches, Lo Yosef Eloi Klum, Iker Rav Yehuda, Masha Asa Yasui, now Yachap, it's Gavaldik. And indeed, so we have a machloikas amoyroyim. That's the conclusion of today's daf. When you learn kedushin, when you learn that Mishnah, even though the reish of the Mishnah says that a makadosh, if a kohen gives a woman kedushin with that which he received as kachin, the Mishnah says eina mikodeshes. Here we clearly see that there is a machloikas amoyroyim, and according to some opinions, and according to this is the word, the same machloikas Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda by Kesef Ma'aser Sheni also goes to kachin, and this is really gavaldik. By Ma'aser Sheni, it's easier to understand by Ma'aser Sheni that it's called Mamain Ba'alim. It's easier to understand it that way because it's taka yours. You have a restriction. You have to eat it in Yerushalmi. When it comes to kachim, don't forget before the act of giving it to God, before you put the dam on the mizbeach, before you put the kamitz on the mizbeach, all of it is holy. And by kachim you're chayiv meila. You understand? No, there is a moment that no one can partake of it. The chiddush will be, especially by kachim. So the chiddush will be that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to hold that the pasha the oivish, there's something that's holy is gifted to the kahanim. It's gifted to the kahanim. The Meir holds they're eating b'shulchan gavoyim. B'chlal in Chassidus we learn that kohanim, the achilas kohanim, it's an amazing concept. On some level, is even greater than achilas mizbeach. It's an awesome concept. And you would think achilas mizbeach is the holiest part of the korban, and then achilas kahanim is almost like a human act. Achilas kohanim is such an important concept with Hasidus that brings the kapara. Just to know that's the true. No, kachim. No, you would think the kapara comes from the zrikas hadam. Halachically comes from the zrikas hadam. I mean, if after the zrikas hadam something happened to the animal, we learned this in kachim. I mean, the owner doesn't have to rebring the korban. That is the key point. And the same thing by the kamitza. Once the burning of the kamitza is like the sprinkling of the dam. Nevertheless, there was something that could be affected only by a chila of a kohen. And we have al pi chasidus, it's always explained, we're elevating the food. And then there is the concept of elevating the food after it was elevated. There's many levels of aliyah, and the highest level of aliyah is affected dafka by the eating of a tzaddik, in this case of a kohen. And just to know that achilas kohanim is the source for the minig by by chasidim of shirayim. Shirayim comes from that. That's the remnant connected to the added koyach of achilas kohanim. And the question is really, how do they affect such a great aliyah? Is it because it's dafka not theirs? Or is it dafka because it is theirs? Do you affect, in other words, what are you elevating? And l'chu'ura, that's al pi chasidus, the greatest elevation should happen dafka if it belongs to them. That's the highest elevation. But even something that belongs to them, that's the greatest elevation. You can't say it choil, it's not choil. But the fact that you're making it mamin ba'alim, and then they are eating what belongs to them, and ubaylam is chaprim, you know how great of a chiddush that is? Maybe Rav Meir holds, for you to say that a human being eating something up is even considered al pi pnimius, a greater aliyah, you are affecting. There's avodas habirurim. These are the words. Avodas habirurim concludes by achilas mizbeach. That's the end of avodas habirurim. And then the concept of ayichud is affected by achilas kohanim. He says you can make that yichud only if they were speaking about a person who's holy, the kohen. The food is holy, mamin gavoya, so they are uniting. Rabbi Yehuda holds even if the food is mamin ba'alim,